stuff. So let's take a look at this week's assignment. Hopefully the content of this assignment is a little bit more fun. It's a culture unit, right? And anytime we get to look at culture, it's always a little bit more fun. History isn't always fun. Nobody ever said it would be, but it's certainly important information. This is kind of where the idea of history being important stuff to know and fun information kind of coincide with each other. So connecting it to last week we looked at the Vietnam War, right? And one thing we didn't really get to in the Vietnam War was what that looked like at home, what it looked like in the United States while the war was going on. And while that war is going on, it's pretty divisive. Honestly, it's a time period which is pretty important to compare to where we are now, because certainly I think it's hard to say that America is a united country. We have a lot of strong differences that are pulling us apart rather than bringing us together. So point being, that idea of it being divisive at home in America during the Vietnam War is very well illustrated with this picture right here, or these two pictures. And so the title for this week is Counterculture. And our question is, how did the counterculture rebel, and how successful was its revolution? And so revolution, rebel, and counter are really the central message that I'm going to try and get across to you, right? So when we say something is counter, it means it's the opposite of, right? So this is the counterculture. A little while back, I can't remember which week it was, we looked at what the culture was like in the United States after the Second World War. And, as the story goes, and I'm going to direct your attention to this left picture here, as the story goes, all those GIs, all those people that fought in the Second World War, come home and they live the life they thought they fought for, or that they were fighting for. And for the most part, they kind of got it, right? They had what we call the nuclear family, meaning they had a job, they had 2 to 3 kids, a wife. The father worked, the mom stayed home and took care of the kids, and the kids all had beautiful comb-overs, just like me, as you can tell by looking at that picture. And their kids were expected to do the same thing they did. Go to school, get a good job, have a family of themselves, 2.3 kids, yada, yada, yada. But not everybody wanted to live that way in the 1970s and 60s. Hence, we get to the counterpart of the counterculture, looking at this picture on the right. This is a picture of Woodstock, which was a big music festival. It's kind of the precursor to all the stuff that you see down at the Gorge. Basically, a bunch of unbathed hippies, you'll learn what the term hippie comes from, got together, did a bunch of drugs, and listened to music, and also had a ton of sex, which kind of brings us down to the second part here, and I want to address this right now. I'm going to check my time real quick. Oh, bollocks. So when I'm looking at part 2 here and I say sex, drugs, and rock and roll, I mean that really. This is where we're getting into some sensitive topics, etc. So if you're going to be offended, I would say looking at music in the 1960s or anti-war movement are the tamest out of all of these. But in reality, this is what the history was. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll is a phrase from the counterculture, and it was central to their ideals. All right, so there's an overview of the content. I'll put another one up for the rest of it.